Hey guys, so we're of course in Duelist Nexus format, so as usual I wanted to provide an updated deck list for Cyber Dragons to combat the current meta, and I actually have some replays that I'd like to share maybe within the next week using this deck list just to show you how to play around this current format. And so definitely, while we are in DUNE format, technically we have another new set coming very shortly, which is Soul Burning Volcano. So if you're into Salamine Grade or those Ghostrite Salamine Wolves, you can certainly check out Card Brawlers. They do have singles available for pre-order already, and you can use code Hakuna5 for 5% off. So as for the deck list, I think honestly, as long as Manadium isn't gonna turbo out like Calamity Lock, I think it's actually not that bad for Cyber Dragon. So let's just get right to the deck list. Alright, so let's just start with the main deck. So of course we have the 3 Cyber Dragon Core, the best normal summon in the deck, quite possibly the only good normal summon realistically. Gets you like the search. We have the 3 Hers and the 3 original Cyber Dragons. This is primarily of course to be pitched for Galaxy Soldier, to go for the Nova Infinity play. Double Naxter, sometimes people play 1 Eye, sometimes shift between 1 and 2. I think right now, because I'm playing Clockwork and also Machine Dupe, just having extra Cyber Dragon bodies is kind of nice, just so you can contact fuse away your opponent's board. And still going with the double Galaxy Soldier, this has always been kind of like your normal standard ratio for the most part. I decided to up the Jizukuru count. Typically you kind of only play 1, some formats you need more. I think right now Pearly is definitely going to be one of the best decks in the format. Just having an extra one is nice to have. Of course they still get the plus off if they have their continuous spell on the field, but at the same time this is of course searchable off of Repair Plant, but it's always nice to have an extra one, and worst case you can always pitch it for Galaxy Soldier because it is a light monster. And then rounding out the final monsters is just the hand traps. I decided to play just Droll. So this was actually, I was swapping between, this as well as, something like Super Poly, just because of this new format. I thought, Super Poly is definitely really good, right? Against something like, let's say, Infernoble or something like Manadium. But at the same time, I thought, originally I was kind of testing it out with the Draco Exquisite in the side, just for if Manadium goes for that Calamity Lock, but I'm not really convinced they're all trying to go for that. And even in terms of like the small results we have so far with like Extravaganza, let's say, and just from my own personal experience at like case tournaments, I haven't seen as much Manadium as I thought I would. So just in case, I think Droll is still good against that and Infernoble, for example, as well as some various other strategies. But that's why I decided to just take out Super Poly, even though I was initially testing with it. Next onto the spells, and we have a ton of them. Of course, the triple Cyber Emergency gets you kind of like that search the Cyber Dragon monster. Repair Plant, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to get Jizukuru, or for the most part, you're going to get Galaxy Soldier after this. 1 Ref System, this is kind of nice to have, honestly, especially when like your core, let's say, just gets popped or something. At least you can bring it back, have that Machine Dupe life, or even like Contact Fusion. Overload Fusion, of course, for the OTK, we are playing Thrust, so this is also something that can technically be searchable off of that. I am not playing Cyberload Fusion anymore, though, just because it's good in the grind game, but I decided to just cut it because especially when I find like when you open with Cyberload Fusion, it usually ends up being kind of a bad card. So I don't know, you can kind of shift between playing it and not playing it. It's up to you. We are of course I always loved Machine Dupe just for like the OTK line of plays. Sometimes when you're going first, whether intentionally or you're forced to go first, it really provides the easiest way to go into Nova Infinity. Whereas the Galaxy Soldier line, the downside of that is under Shifter you cannot do that, and also under Droll you also play harder into that and can't make Nova Infinity line with that as well. So that's why I think Machine Dupe is actually still pretty important. Of course it can conflict with the triple Clockwork Night, just because of course this kind of boosts your baby Cyber Dragons by a little bit in terms of attack, so then they no longer can be used with Machine Dupe in terms of bringing out original Cyber Dragons. But still, this card is super good. Being able to contact fuse your opponent's entire board can lead to very easy OTKs, and not to mention it just forces out a negate for the most part, because they kind of have to, otherwise they risk just losing everything. So that's why I really like this card. And also, speaking of easy OTKs, is triple Duality. And so this card, I honestly think this card is probably the best in Cyber Dragons compared to any other deck. I also play Branded, and I get it, it can be very good in that deck too, but at the same time, in that deck it's a lot more of a win more card than it is in Cyber Dragons, because, well, quite frankly, we're a much worse deck than Branded, and this card can help consistency in terms of, let's say, you just turn, a dead Galaxy Soldier or just a regular Cyber Dragon into Current Tech Rampage that can send a Hers and a Core. Hers adds back the Core Engrave, and then you have a normal summon that you can add something off of. And also, something like I can get to later in the extra deck, just it can lead to a variety of different OTKs. Can also kind of help in the grind game in terms of being able to return some cards to the deck and then draw one. So, it's really nice to have, although although unfortunately by itself it's not really going to help the consistency issue, but it can still, in the right combination of cards, can really boost this deck. And some more other generic spell cards, one Feather Duster and the double Lightning Storm. Originally I was sort of tinkering around with this in terms of, you know, being able to put, like, let's say Super Poly, as I mentioned earlier, but you know what, I opted to go with this because, you know, I really want to be able to blow out like back row, which Cyber Dragons have traditionally kind of struggled against, and, you know, Labyrinth is still in the mix. Nice to have some kind of board wipe, and of course in terms of going second, powerhouse spells, the double talents and the double thrust. I think it's super good. This is so good in decks that are going second, you know, especially Cyber Dragons. Let's say, you know, you just take whatever, and usually you do the take effect just so you can kill them essentially. You know, drawing 2 is kind of, you know, you're just taking a gamble at that point. You're not really reliable. Thrust is very good because, you know, you can search it like any of these, and also, you know, let's say if you have a bunch of board breakers but you just don't have something like, let's say, like a machine dupe or a cyber emergency to go off, that can also help you get access to it. A while back, when Thrust kind of first came out, I was also trying out with the Fusion DP package, Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, so that you can you know, search Fusion Destiny, for example, and have more of a grindy playstyle. So if that's the kind of playstyle you want to go instead of like OTK, Fusion Destiny, that package with, you know, Celestial as well as Dasher, those are things that you can look into as well. And some other packages that I've been trying out recently is, of course, the Sky Striker package with the double engage Hornet Drones, 1 Afterburner, 1 Widow Anchor, and 1 Jamming Waves. I actually really like this just because, you know, these cards, like, it can just force out either negates, right, with any kind of monster, and just the double engage just gets you access to whatever you really need depending on the board that you're facing, right? This is for back row, this is just for any kind of monster interruption, which you probably have. Only drawing this is usually not great, but, you know, this essentially goes into Kagari, go into, you know, put another token, and then you can go into dark, and then if they have a dark monster in the grave, which they probably do, then, you know, it can either, again, force out some kind of interruption, or you get just some kind of like big body that you can use for OTK. And then moving on to the extra deck, it's pretty flexible. So we have the 1 Omarage, 1 Anima. When I was originally playing Super Poly and I had to cut this, I really missed this. This actually kind of comes up a decent amount. Punishes players that puts it in the wrong zone, but also you can put, you know, Jizukuru or Nibiru token if you're playing Nibiru, just in that zone 3 or 4. And then we also have, of course, the Seeger just for the OTK. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, the Kagari and the Dark. I was also considering Azalea, and it's something you could do. It's just unfortunate that you cannot go into Azalea using just this and the Sky Striker token, unfortunately, but you can go into Dark, and again, it can force out some potential interruptions, and you can always go into this something like with like your Chimera Tech monsters because they are also Dark. Some Xyz monsters, we have the Nova Infinity. I really want to fit 2 of this. I think that does actually come up enough to warrant it. I used to always play double of these, but just with just the current iteration of this deck, I don't have the space, but I'll let you know why I decided to only still play with 1. We have the 1 Zeus, definitely mandatory. You know, you can board wipe, and also, you know, it's a machine, so even if you're machine locked under Naxxer after you use that effect, for example, you can still go into Zeus, which is always nice. Some Chimera Tech fusions. We have double Rampage. So I think playing 2 is it definitely comes up because the first one, let's say, or just any one of them, you know, when you're playing Duality, most of the time you're going to this, so that you still have another one that you can bring out with like Overload Fusion, and I've definitely had that come up before, and especially because its effects are actually like soft ones return, it's kind of nice. So, you know, can enable OTKs. We of course have the double Mega Fleet. This one definitely, I think you have to play at least 2 of if you're playing Clockwork Night, just so you can contact fuse away your opponent's monsters, because Fortress is going to get really big. And the great thing is about this card in terms of level, though, with Duality, this can actually go into something like Cyber Twin Dragon, which can enable really easy OTK, because in a direct attack, this is 5600 on its own, so you essentially just need this to be at 3000 or higher, and that's going to be a game. And of course, we have the 1 Mega Fleet as well, and so that's something that doesn't come up as much anymore now that ever since we hit the new Master Rule, but way back in 2020, but still it's a good card to have. And the reason why I decided to play just 1 Nova is because I ultimately decided to still have another target for Duality using Mega Fleet, which can go into Cyber Eternity Dragon, which honestly can be kind of a beefy body, and for some decks it can be a little hard to out. And the reason I also decided to play just another Duality target is that, in some cases where you just didn't open very well, and you can at least go into Mega Fleet, and the Duality, I'm going to this, you can at least have that draw effect off Duality live just to, get things going, because this deck, it's always had some form of consistency issues, which is why I always play Pot of Prosperity, but at the same time, now that I'm kind of focusing on more of an OTK kind of build, I just decided not to run Prosperity, especially when the extra deck is so tight. Honestly, there's not really much you can banish anymore, but those are some options that you can play. For the most part, I did play Prosperity. Realistically though, in the next Bandmaster 2, that card is probably going to get at least limited. Now, moving on to the side deck, originally I thought I would just play Nibiru, but instead I actually decided to just go with Ash instead. And the reason for that is because, if you're playing Nibiru, usually you need like another hand trap alongside with it for it to be actually effective, because nowadays, people have like monster negates up before you can Nibiru. And this deck, as you would notice, it doesn't play that many hand traps other than like that Droll. And so instead, that's why I decided to just go with Ash, a little more generic, and again, something like Labyrinth Branded, very high impact. We also decided to go with Droplets instead of something like Super Poly, and I think this card is actually, aside from Kashira because of Arizard's Banish effect, and also to an extent Flunder, where, if they have Shifter, sure, but other than those decks, I think this card is very, very good. Let's say something like Infernoble, they have, more of a monster-heavy presence, so this card is very nice against that. Against Manadium, unfortunately, they usually have the counter trap, and, this deck, at least in the main deck, does not play any traps, so sadly, you will not be able to prevent them from responding with the counter trap, but, again, it's still going to be really good against most decks. Let's say against like Branded with their Gimmick Lock, for a going second deck second lock like that is quite problematic, so being able to stop that is very, very nice. We also have the triple Cosmic. As you would notice in this deck, you play a lot of spells, so against something like Anti-Spell Fragrance, you're gonna just have a really hard time unless you can somehow make Zeus without getting interrupted and clear the field. So having a quick play form of removal is very, very important to have, and I think what I've seen so far is that, let's say something like Infernoble, because they kind of hard lose to Dark Ruler, I am seeing them play Anti-Spell in the side deck, and you always have a deck like, let's say, Sword Soul, they almost always have Anti-Spell in the side deck, so things to consider. Some going first, second options is that the Floodgates, because they're actually, they can be quite impactful even when you go second against the right decks. And so I think against, especially with a card like Clockwork that turns everything into machines, then your opponent's probably locked because, most likely they're not playing a machine deck. So it's Rivalry, I think it's very, very nice to have. And this deck can just be like FTK against certain strategies, in particular Branded. And some other going first options is D-Barrier and the Cybernetic Overflow. So these two cards are, of course, something you can set off of Thrust when you're going first. A lot of times, whether you think you're going to get forced to go first post side, or if you decide to intentionally go first. And that's why I decided to have my side deck be very flexible, where, if you can imagine, Ash, you can do that going first or second. These are quick play, you can do it going first or second. These are good going first or second. These are the only ones that are not very good going, well, Overflow can be good going second, actually. It's usually main decked in Cyber Dragons, but just right now, I find, I just had to cut it. And D-Barrier is kind of like the only option where if you think you're going to go first, or it's impactful enough where that it's worth putting in regardless of whether you're going first or second. So that's why I made my side deck a little flexible, because I'm thinking that, if they know what you're playing, I think if they force you to like go first with your main deck, this deck is definitely going to struggle quite hard. So you have to be very flexible post side. Alright guys, so that was it for the deck profile for Cyber Dragons. Hopefully you found that helpful. Definitely, if you have any questions, certainly leave them in the comments down below. And as I said earlier in the video, definitely I'll have some replays available within the next week involving this deck list, so definitely stay tuned for that. Thanks to all of you for watching. A big thanks to my Patreons as usual for supporting the channel, and well, take care guys.